Welcome to The Work Within, where we have conversations about mental health and faith to help you live with greater connection and wholeness in your everyday life. The Work Within is a podcast of the Watershed Initiative, supporting the mental health needs of the local church. Thanks for listening. Hi, welcome to The Work Within. I'm your host, John Lin, and today I'm joined by my co-hosts, Dieula Previlon and Ly Tran. Welcome to the show, guys. In our inaugural episode, we want to talk about a four-letter word that prevents many of us from changing and improving our lives. And that word is pain. But before we dive into a really important conversation, I thought it'd be helpful to do some brief introductions since this is our first show. All right, so this is called The Work Within, and this is a podcast. Our heart for this podcast is really to help people, just everyday people, live with greater connection and wholeness in their everyday lives. And we want to draw from mental health, from scripture, theology, and even just our everyday experiences, our experiences. And our hope is that these conversations would add value to your lives. So my name is John. I have served as a pastor and a minister in a variety of different contexts. And most recently, I have the privilege of working with a group of therapists that are passionate about serving the mental health needs of the local church. And that's through a program we call the Watershed Initiative. I also serve as the executive director for a nonprofit called Sweet Deeds Foundation. And our mission is to increase access to quality mental health resources for the vulnerable and overlooked. I'm married to my beautiful wife, Grace. We have 4 wonderful boys and a Yorkie named Nori, which rhymes. So, Dieula, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Dieula Previlon. I am the founder and executive director for Elevate Her International, where we empower women to heal from trauma, grow, and thrive. I'm also a pastor in the Evangelical Covenant Church denomination, where I've pastored in a couple of different churches. I'm also the proud grandmother of the 5-month-old Clora, and I'm the mother of 3 sons, Ray, Justin, and Devin, and the proud wife to Frez, married 27 years. So that's a little bit about me.
Yes.
Gosh, I can't believe you're a grandmother, Dieula. 5 months old, like 5-month-old grandkid. Oh my gosh.
I know, that's in my bio now.
I love it. I love it. Well, my name is Ly Tran. I am the founder and lead executive director for the Well Group. And we essentially provide a lot of mental health services for different parts of the community, the community at large, for local churches, and for parts of the community that are underserved and under-resourced as well. I've also served as a pastor in my past life, and have been an entrepreneur ever since leaving seminary, just doing different things. And so you asked me what I'm doing on any given day, it could change. So that's what I'm doing today. Let's see, my family, I'm married to my wife, Dana, and we've got 4 children, Evangeline, Juliet, Aaron, and Jacob. And yeah, so that keeps our lives full.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited to be here with you all to have this conversation. And today we're going to be talking about pain. If there's only one episode that we could do for this podcast, I would choose this topic because it's that important. It's that important to me. I think it's that important to everyone who's listening. I am 100% convinced that our capacity to deal with pain is directly, let me put it this way, that our capacity to have any type of meaningful change in our lives is 100% dependent on our capacity to deal with pain.
Mm-hmm.
You guys know that I've been on a really significant healing journey over the last few years. It's been an incredible time of growth and transformation and healing. And it's been aided by the help of friends, wise therapists, my faith in God, my family, my wife. And one of the things I keep coming back to during this journey, one of the things I keep learning is that for me to become a stronger and healthier individual, to be a better husband or father or leader, or even just a child of God, I have to learn to increase my tolerance for pain. Or as a mentor of mine likes to say, I have to increase my comfort with discomfort. Why is that? It's simple. I think 2 reasons at least. One, because I think any type of meaningful change or transformation process involves some discomfort, and oftentimes it involves a lot of pain. And secondly, I know that my natural inclination and bent is to run away from pain. I want to avoid pain at all costs. Or if I have to experience a little bit, I'm trying to minimize it, numb it, or get rid of it as soon as possible. But what I realize is if I do that, if I try to get out of that situation, I'm not in there long enough, what ends up happening is I short circuit the process and I don't stay in it long enough to get to the other side where there is the promise of change and growth. So as a simple example, I was a couple weeks ago, I was driving with my son, who's a junior in high school, and he's learning how to drive. So he was driving and I was next to him, and something happened and I just lashed out, y'all. And immediately I knew that what I said was mean-spirited. It was disproportional to what happened, and it was out of line.
Yeah.
And everything in me in that moment just wanted to change the subject and pretend like it didn't happen. Because I was feeling some pain. I was feeling the pain of some shame. I was feeling some pain of embarrassment over how I had reacted. But I decided to just take some deep breaths, notice that I was feeling the pain. And then, I told him like, hey, I'm really sorry for the way I reacted there. That wasn't okay. And that was a small but significant repair that happened that I think if I had actually just done my autopilot of trying to avoid the pain, I would have short-circuited that process. And our relationship would have been affected by that. So I mentioned at the beginning of our show that our hope is to increase and help people live with greater connection and wholeness. Can you guys speak to, how have you seen the way you and me and people deal with pain? How does that affect our capacity to have those things in our lives?
Yeah. And can I jump in real quick with the tension I'm feeling with pain and suffering? With the work that I do, I'm always reminded that pain is not our friend. Pain and suffering is not how it was supposed to be. Because I wrestle with that tension because there are some types of pain that we need to do something about. We need to challenge systems to stop it, because there's some pain that is created and causes the children of God to suffer unnecessarily, right? And so I wanted to really speak on those pain, those kinds of pain, and that's not our friend. Yes, because we live in a fallen world, we're always going to engage with pain in some shape or form, right? At the same time, I want to just bring to light the tension I'm feeling inside of me, that I that this conversation is not about glorifying pain or um asking for more pain so that we can deal with it or any of that, but it is the tension that we live in this fallen world that pain is not our friend. It's not how it was supposed to be and not how it's going to be in the end, right? But it is where we are now. And how do we meet people and even pain within ourselves? How do we wrestle with the pain of this world, right? So I just wanted to
Yeah.
make that point before we even dive in deeper into talking about how to deal with it. Lee, you can take
Yeah.
the next. I just wanted to drop the bomb real quick.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that because I listen, Dieula, you and I live in a world as therapists where we're in people's pain all day long, and so we see the outcomes of that. but I will be the first one to say it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to go looking for pain either. And that's not what we're suggesting here. I thank you for that clarification, because I think the reality is that if you live this life long enough, pain will find you, right? You don't need to go looking
Absolutely.
for it.
Absolutely.
I think the premise of this conversation is really, what do we do with that? Like, how do we handle what comes our way, without like trying to be a glutton for punishment either? So I think that is a good framing for the way we discuss this. I also want to maybe take a moment here and frame the definition of pain, because the way you describe that, John, first of all, I think anyone that's going to teach their kid how to drive is hey, it's you're going to experience something out of that, right?
Yes.
Um, and so you describe the feeling of shame and embarrassment as a subset of pain, right? And so I think it would be helpful for us as we talk about this, and for our listeners to expand that definition, to say there's pain that can come in a lot of different forms, right?
Yeah.
Shame and failure being one of them,
Yeah.
loss, and pain in relationships. These are things that happen on the daily, right? And so yeah, that's probably, for our discussion, where I'd like to frame it as well, kind of like along what Drill was saying, is that, hey, that this is a much broader definition that we're dealing with as well, right?
Yeah.
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 Yeah. I appreciate that. That's a good word. I mean, and yeah, because there's pain that happens to us, pain that is inflicted upon us. There's also pain that we cause others
Hmm.
and to ourselves. And maybe they're not all the same. And so I appreciate that tension that you're illuminating for us. And so if we hold with the starting point that pain in its broadest sense is a part of our existence and our humanness. And I like what you said, Lee. It will find you.
Yes. Yes.
You know, what do you guys see as maybe the typical response to that? That can maybe be less than helpful or less than constructive.
Yeah, I think, rightly, the human spirit wants to run from pain, right? And for what it's worth, I think it's our human spirit, what's inside of us, that wants us to run, because who wants to keep their hands on a burning stove inflicting pain on them, right? You know, um I believe God creates us with these natural instincts to run from pain of the world. While at the same time, I believe if we continually run from, you know, um, dealing with the pain of relationship, dealing with the pain of, parental abuse, or whatever the case may be, dealing with the pain that we find ourselves within relationship, because half the time the people that come into our office asking for help to deal with pain, they're there because something happened in their relationship. So the first place we will see pain is probably through our relationships, right? And we can't run from that. That is the pain that we need to lean in and not run from. And leaning in is the way forward, because that's what's going to help us create the types of relationships that help us with the healing process for the long haul. So although the natural instinct makes us want to run, we have to fight against the natural instincts of running from pain that we see, especially in relationships. We have to lean in and do the work of leaning in. So that's what I would say. The natural thing is to run from,
Yeah.
but it's important to run towards and run in and lean in.
As you're talking about that notion of leaning in, I'm reminded of if you guys have heard this illustration of what bison do, um, in the plains, in the Great Plains, where when a storm comes, while most animals will run away from the storm, bison will actually run into the storm.
Mm,
Because like I think the way I understand this is because they know that going through the storm will get them to the other side of it faster.
wow.
Um, which kind of highlights, I think, to maybe the distinction that we're talking about, Gurla, that our natural tendency is to run away. But if you understand what the storm is about
Hmm.
and you understand what it's doing, then there's a decision that we can make to lean into it, right? And I think you kind of like touched upon one of the key things I think that makes a distinction for us, which is for myself included, like I feel like, yeah, if I feel pain, I'm going to avoid it.
Hmm.
But if I know that there's a purpose to it, if I
Hmm.
know that there is something meaningful in it, as hard as it is, I will lean into it because I want to get through it, right? Like,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
to linger outside of it, that just prolongs it. So I think there's a certain level of awareness that we have to have when it comes to pain and what it's doing to us, and the merit of it, right?
yeah,
I think
Hmm.
once we're
yeah,
convinced of that, I think it's an easier decision to make, to say, okay, we're gonna do the hard thing now, right?
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. I
Hmm.
think even when it's hard to see purpose in pain right away, though,
Yeah.
right? It's hard to see why we suffer right away. And even if at all,
Yeah.
I don't know. There's some things that's happened to me. I don't think I ever know why. I don't even understand the purpose of the pain, right? While at the same time, it's important for me to get through it, to get to the other side and to wake up the next morning and wake up the next day and do the hard work of working through said pain. So sometimes, and I've sat with people who just don't get the meaning because I think um if we believe if we can understand it enough, then it would feel less painful. And that's not,
Mhm.
at least in my case.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
don't know for you, Lee. I don't know for you, John, if it would be less painful. I think it's still painful, but it's still necessary to walk through it, right?
Yeah.
Because to sit on the side of pain and just day in and day out, and you wake up in pain and you sleep in pain, and especially the ones that we can do something about, right? There are some pain, we can't do some things about everything that happened to us, but there's a lot that's within our control, right? And so what do we do with that? I think that there's so many nuances, so many
There's a lot.
layers to this
Yeah, yeah.
painting, right?
Lee, I do want to just point out that imagery of a bison running towards the storm, because
Yeah.
that is the way to get through the storm faster. And running away actually only prolongs the storm. And so
Yeah.
I was not expecting that to be one of our takeaways from our conversation, but be like bison, move towards the storm. Could we talk a little bit? I'm thinking a little bit about what it means to run away from pain and what that looks like for different people who may be listening. So, for example, I know that when I experience something painful, usually I just want to shut down my emotions and not feel anything. A lot of times I'm like, Grace will ask me, "Hey, how do you feel?" I'm like, "Oh, I don't know. I just don't even know." It's like I can't even access it sometimes. Or I like to eat my pain away. So I will notice sometimes that I'm stressed and I'm just compulsively eating because that just helps bring some soothing there, but it's not addressing the pain or the situation. So, in terms of what you've seen, what does running away from pain look like? Because I think that might help people who may not even realize that they're running away from pain.
I'm pointing to you, Lee. You
Okay.
start.
All right. Yeah, I think I see a lot of the various coping strategies that you had mentioned, John, and let me be clear, I'll be the first one to say I have partaken as well, because sometimes when the pain is real, like there is just some things I feel like give us immediate reprieve, right? But the question in more in my mind as a mental health professional is, how long do we stay there? How long
Hmm.
how long do we need to catch a breath for and to recover? to give ourselves a minute before we begin to engage the work, right? And so whether it is hey, I'm just going to check out and binge on Netflix, or I'm going to, do things to distract myself, eat, food. Like there's a lot of things I feel like I come across in the mental health world where people will use everything from not just alcohol, drugs, food, pornography, relationships, career, ministry. Like there are a lot of things that we can pour ourselves into that can give us a little bit of that dopamine hit to distract ourselves and to numb ourselves from all the other stuff that's going on underneath. So, and I want to be gentle with that and pair that back with what you're always saying. Really, would say, hey, this is something this is natural.
Yeah.
We all deal with pain, and so it's not like to heap more shame upon you if you feel like you're doing things to distract yourself from that. It is more of an issue of like, hey, like how much are we balancing that with leaning in, right? And so there's nuance to this one as well. But that is typically the way I'll see most people run away from pain and to avoid. There's plenty of distractions that we have in this world in which we can
Yeah.
do that with, right?
Yeah. Even the church, I believe, or even religiosity can sometimes be a way we run from pain, and evade even,
Yeah.
sometimes in the church, you'll ask someone how you're doing, they'll say fine, Jesus handles it all,
Yeah.
prayer, I'm doing all these things when really that language, the Christianese that we use is a way of numbing, is a way of evading from dealing with the pain. So we just put a religious, phrase over it, and that's supposed to make the pain a little bit better. But truth be told, it doesn't really, remove the pain or take away the pain. And I'm not saying, to not pray or to not lean into positivity and all of that. All that is good, but there's a certain level of Christianese and religiosity I'm seeing that just covers
Yeah.
pain and does not allow people to really feel or even lean in or even ask the hard questions of God or even lament, So there are some religious circles who say, don't ask questions, don't lament, why even focus on that? But Lee and I will tell you that part of the healing journey is to lament, is to ask God questions, is to go there with God, is to,
Mm.
feel all the feelings. And so sometimes in the church, we see people numb,
Yeah.
with like a scripture verse, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, Jeremiah 29. Like we'll
Right.
just say the verses without really going through the healing journey.
I appreciate that. I've heard the phrase spiritual bypass used, which kind
Yes.
of describes that spiritual bypassing. And I think that is often reinforced in Christian circles. And I really appreciate what the both of you are saying, that pain will happen and we will cope in different ways. And some of that coping is just natural and okay. And I appreciate you saying that, because what we don't want people to hear in this conversation is, well, shame on you for dealing with your pain in that way.
Hmm.
But there can be a point, right? If we continue along that path of coping and never tend to either the wound or the trauma or the source of it, that can be unhealthy or it can be counterproductive to experiencing the lives that we want to live. And so
Yeah.
having curiosity about that and then moving towards that. There's a quote that I came across from Melanie Wells, the founder of Lifology, and it stuck with me because she said, "Never waste pain. It's too expensive." That's kind of sat with me for a while since I heard it. Because pain is naturally uncomfortable and unpleasant, I think most of us see pain in a very negative way. And her quote sort of challenges that, or at least it evokes kind of second thought about, let me think about that. Like maybe pain there's a cost to pain that makes it costly and worth considering or looking at again in maybe a new perspective. I'd like to ask y'all what kind of mental shift or perspective shift do you think is important to have when we think about pain or have this conversation about pain?
Yeah. It just what we've been sharing, it makes sense that people would not want to lean in. And I'm especially thinking of the ones who would share that they're afraid to go through the healing journey because once they do, they don't know how they're going to be able to handle it, because it can cause them to come on undone. And my heart goes out to those groups of people because that is a real thing, when people don't have the resources around them, like friends, family, other things to help them create the stability under them to help them go through the pain journey. So I'm always very careful, when I'm encouraging people to heal, heal, heal. And then we as a community don't give them the resources to heal, 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 right? And I feel like that is doing the people in our communities a disservice to talk about healing so much and without the resources, and resources meaning friends, people in the community, family in the community, and just basic resources to heal. So in those terms, I my heart goes out. There's so much grace. There's no shame. There's no blame when it comes to healing, because part of what I love what Melanie shared, to not waste the pain. And I've heard that before because sometimes there are some key lessons that pain can teach us. Not that we want to move towards pain and we want to inflict pain on people so that they can come out with lessons and a testimony, right? Because God can teach us lessons in so many different ways. The moon, the stars, the trees, they're all lessons all around us. And I believe that there are some lessons we can come out of with pain, through pain, right? And also with pain, there are some things that God can teach us through the pain, right? So don't waste the pain. I don't want people to hear it as if we're shaming or blaming or anything like that. But there are some lessons that we can walk away from with going through the healing journey. And then there are some opportunities and goals and purpose and different things that you are able to do on the other side of pain that you can't do while you're in the midst of pain. So there's some great benefits that you can walk away with when doing the work of healing.
Yeah, I won't add too much more because I think you said it really well, Dieula. I think to the original question, John, of like, what kind of mind shift are we looking for here when it comes to how we see pain and how we may talk our clients through that? I think I would say it this way. I think about this for me personally. If God revealed to me like all the things I needed to deal with, right? All the pain that was going on within me at any given time, like at once, I couldn't bear it.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just too much. And so I feel like one of God's graces for me is that when the time is right, when it's time for me to deal with the thing, that it will become apparent. And so I think of it like, scar tissue. Like there are times in which I have a bad shoulder, and like I have limited range of motion, and so there's pain there. And honestly, like I don't want to go to physical therapy for it. I don't want to deal with that, right? Like that's just painful, right? But when I realize that there are times in which I need to use this arm and I have to do things with that, then it becomes apparent I got to deal with some of the scar tissue. And so that becomes the open door for me to deal with the thing and to start doing the work, and leaning into the pain. So the way I describe to my clients the shift in thinking is, hey, we're not looking for everything here. We don't need to open all the doors. We don't need to go hunting for everything. But when we think about where we are in life and what we're doing and the kind of relationships that we're in and what is required of us to do relationship, to do the work, to do whatever it is that God has tasked us for, it becomes pretty clear at that point where the scar tissue is, and that becomes where we lean into, right? And as I said before at the beginning, we don't need to go hunting for it. We got plenty of those things that become apparent. Like, I'm not trying to open up all those doors. So that's the way I would describe maybe just a slight shift to be willing to go there, to expand your capacity, but in the areas that make the most sense, right? The areas that are necessary.
That's so good.
That's good.
Yeah, I've heard two things that both of you said that I feel like are really worth reiterating so that we can see, kind of chew on this more. One is what you said, Jirla, a second ago about this is not an individualistic thing. It's not about I just got to work harder to increase my capacity to tolerate discomfort. Rather, it's a communal effort. That building resilience is a communal or relational thing. And my gosh, that is so true. You know, I wouldn't be standing here right now if it weren't for the support of Ly and other people that have really been willing to get into the muck with me and bear my pain with me. That has been what has sustained me. And that God has used that to provide grace. And so my understanding of the body of Christ has just gone so much deeper as I've seen how essential relationship is to that healing process. And then what I hear you saying, Ly, is that it's not all or nothing. You don't have to deal with all your baggage and pain all at once, because who could handle that? No one could. There are very few of us who are called to kind of live the Job experience, right? But rather, we can be faithful to respond to the situations that kind of come our way, and maybe even wisely with discernment kind of choose, okay, in this season, I want to start to unpack this part of my story or journey that is painful. And in time, I'm not ready to do that yet, and that's okay. So I really appreciate that perspective, because otherwise I think it can feel really overwhelming, like, oh my gosh, who wants to do that, right?
Yeah.
So thank you both for sharing that. I'm struck by something that you alluded to earlier as well, like this idea of what is on the other side of that storm. What is the new capacity? Jirla, you mentioned that. Or what is the peace or comfort or growth that happens on the other side of that? And there's a scripture that really stands out to me that speaks to this. And of course, we look to the example of Jesus and see how he had this, incredible resilience and ability to sit in uncomfortable situations and to endure pain. And the verse that kind of came to my mind when I was thinking about this conversation was Hebrews 12:2. It says, "Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross." Who for the joy set before him endured just immeasurable pain. The pain physical, the emotional pain of betrayal and abandonment, the spiritual pain of being separated from his Father, the pain of bearing the weight of sin and death, right? Just unimaginable pain. And what does it say? That, at least in that scripture, what was the vision that propelled Jesus forward? It was the joy set before him. And so I have this picture of Jesus, like, I think there's a text that says he set his face like flint, right, towards the goal. And so I imagine Jesus is looking towards this joy that awaits him to help him endure the pain. And the text doesn't really describe what the joy is, but maybe it was several different types of joy. The joy of knowing that his work on the cross was going to deliver and save and free the children of God. And he saw their faces Maybe it was the joy of knowing that he was going to break the damn curse of sin and death. Maybe it was the joy of knowing that his Father in heaven loved him unconditionally. Maybe it was the joy of knowing that he was about to do what he had come to this earth to do. So we may surmise, right, what that joy was, but it does strike me that it was the joy set before him that allowed our Savior and Lord to walk through the hardest thing any human being has ever walked through. So what thoughts do you guys have as we consider that example of Christ, or what gets stirred up for you as we talk about that?
I think this goes back to what I was saying before about like, what's the purpose and what's on the other side of this? And I like what you said, Drilla, which is like, how do I put this? When we know what the purpose is, okay, I'm going to get a root canal. Like, I know that's painful. I know what the outcome of that is. That process happens enough times to where I know with some level of predictability what the outcome is. And so I'm willing to go through that because I know what the outcome of that is. What's really hard is when we go through pain and we're not sure what the outcome is, right?
Yeah.
And we are not guaranteed that information, nor will we maybe ever know that on this side of heaven either, right? Those are the ones that get really hard.
That sounds really hard. Yeah.
Yeah. And so again, there's a kind of a gradient here. Like there's some pain, like, okay, this is hard, but I got to do the thing because I know where this goes, right? I think big scale here. Let me just speak from experience on this one. Okay, if I can just share just how it's felt for me.
Yes.
I remember when I lost my third child, Aaron. Clearly, that's a devastating experience. And Drilla, you and I have been on podcasts before. We talked about grief and loss and that, and in the liminal space. Maybe we'll get into that a little bit later on in this meeting. But there is this experience afterwards. I'm like, I don't know why this happens. What is the upside to this? What is the purpose behind losing a child? And I remember like maybe weeks after that loss, I went back to work, and I remember talking to one of my mentors, Gene Getz, and he's a seminary professor of mine as well, and I was in his office, and I was like, Gene, like, I don't get it, like, why, what is God doing? And he he just shook his head and he was like, Lee, I don't know if we get to have the answer of why. And that's really hard to stomach, right? But that started me on a journey over the next months and years of just saying, okay, I've got to lean in. I don't know what the outcome of this is going to be. I can say this on this side of it, 9 years removed from that. It is very much, I would say, like a Jacob experience where Jacob wrestles with the Lord in the desert. And the outcome is you get to see a face of God that you had not seen before.
Right.
And there's joy in that for me. There's a deep sense of restoration that I now see through that, something that I had not seen before. Right. So I would say that for those that are listening where like that purpose is unclear, like you may not know that right now.
No.
You may not ever know that.
Never.
But I do know that whenever I've leaned into the pain and whenever I've allowed that process to take its course, there is something that happens. I think there's a stretching that happens within one's heart to accommodate to the significance and the weight of that pain. And within that, then joy comes in. Peace comes into that.
Yeah.
And it is, if I could say it this way, it is a violent act within.
Yes.
It's tearing. And nothing about it feels pretty. Nothing about it feels like good, but it is what happens. It's a tearing action. And then the Lord mends, and then the capacity to feel joy and depth and understanding increases as well. So that's as best as I can describe of what happens on the end of that. But what do you guys think?
No, I think that's really good. Thank you so much for giving that sharing a little bit more of your story. I feel similar. Pain is clarifying in so many ways. It brings so much clarity of what are we doing here, right? Like, what is this all about? These are questions that we probably would never ask. We take all of those things for granted. What are we doing here? And we must ask these questions at some point in our life. And so imagine people who just go about their lives and never have to sit with the question of what is all this? What's happening? And I think pain causes you to go there um, at a deeper place. I also think pain causes you to to simplify joy a little bit more, as at least for me, because I feel like we use joy as a reward for when we have done good or when everything is lined up, when all life is, doing what we want it to do. Now we get to experience joy. But for people who have been through pain and suffering, we're like, oh, no, 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 no. We get to clarify joy a little bit more. We get to sit on the side of pain and get snippets of joy in the midst of pain. And I never understood how that was so until I went through pain myself. And I needed joy to help me survive the journey
Mm.
of pain. And so for me, joy became waking up in the morning and seeing the sun. And I'm like, oh, thank you, God. Joy became walking in the park and having a moment of stillness. Joy became, just watching people. Joy became so much simpler than just I have a big old party and I have joy. It became so simple for me. So pain is clarifying. It
It
clarifies
clarifies
what we're
what.
doing here, clarifies joy, clarifies, purpose. What am I to do with this information, with this life that some of which I understand, some of which I don't understand. And then this God that's so big and all around us, and I see, sense, and feel God, but I don't get how this God works, right? So it just causes you to engage in things that you haven't had the privilege of engaging before pain.
If if I could take a moment right now, because I feel like the conversation has moved to a broader level, and I want to just, for the sake of the conversation and for the listeners, to just spot that, just to define that, because
Absolutely.
we started off this conversation defining a subset of pain, which is shame. And then John, you kind of teed it up for us. I'm like, hey, like the feeling of inadequacy and the feeling of guilt, of self condemnation, right? That I would say my work, clinical work, that's about a good 70-80% of the work. Like
Mm.
most people, when they're coming in, they're dealing with anxiety, depression, addiction. It is a shame based pain experience. Okay. We've also kind of moved into, like, by my sharing of my story and Dieula, your story, pain of loss and grief.
Mhm.
And um, when the world doesn't make sense and things are stripped from us in a way, and we feel powerless to that, right? Um, and then Dieula, as you're talking about it, another one comes up, which is the feeling, the pain of not being seen, not
Mm.
not being cared for, and I think that's tied to loss, because I think when we do go through terrible pain, we wonder where's community, where are our
Mhm.
loved ones, and probably for the believer, most importantly, where's God in all that?
Yeah.
And so I'm gonna plug your book here, Drilla, and if you move your head slightly, you can probably see it, because I see it right there, right? And
Hey, look
so
at that.
yeah, so Drilla, you've written about this, and I think that is where the conversation naturally goes when we talk about pain. Is how do we recover from these different things, whether it's the crushing weight of our own inadequacy, our own failure, or the pain of loss and grief, or the pain of not being seen, the pain of rejection and abandonment. These are all things that I feel like become natural parts of the conversation. And when I said earlier, like in wrestling with God, like what I see is a different side of God's face, I have to ask that question too. Like, Lord, do you see me in this pain? Am I important to you? Do I matter to you? Right. And I think in those questions, they become more visceral, they become more poignant, they become necessary conversations. And I think that is the outcome. Because that's where you get those steps of joy. It's like, okay, I don't have a full understanding, but I have little bits, right? And therein lies when we get little bits of those answers, when we wrestle with God in those ways, we get joy, right? So that's the way I've experienced it. Now, I just want to try and maybe collapse it a little bit better, so we have maybe the definition of pain in that way, right?
It's good.
Wow. Yeah. When we started this conversation, I couldn't necessarily envision all the different textures that it would take. But I do feel like you have both helped add a perspective that honors the realities of pain and how multifaceted it is, how deep and at a very core level it can touch. I imagine there are people listening and they are going through maybe immense pain and they're feeling like they're in a very vulnerable or raw spot. Is there anything you'd like to say to them?
Mm, wow, that's good. That's a good question. Well, I think for me is the feeling of being alone in the pain. And I want to remind our listeners that you're not alone in your pain. You know, we are all at some point, whether we're just getting out of pain, whether we're in the middle of it, or whether we're on our way to experiencing pain, the human race have all experienced pain, which in some ways um, is comforting knowing that you're not alone, you know? So I hope that you know that. And I hope that as you know that you're not alone in this healing journey or in your pain, that you would lean in, whatever way that looks like, you know, whether it's leaning in with a friend, leaning in with a pastor, leaning in with the community. Um, and I pray, my prayer for you is that you may find thought partners, communication partners, where you can lean in that way so you can talk through your pain. Because sometimes that's half of the healing is being able to find spaces where you can lean in and start processing your pain. So my prayer for you is that you would find that in whatever community you're at, that you would lean in that way.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of that one too, and say first for those that are listening, they're just going through it right now, and feeling the weight of it. Um, I'll resonate with you and say I've felt moments in my life where I feel like I don't know how I'm supposed to get through today, and I don't know if I want to. Like I feel for the people that are in this space where it's that hard, because there's a sense of despair and deep uncertainty as to how will we survive this, how will I come out of this, right? And so then connecting that with what you're saying, Jurla, which is it doing it alone, I think, is what makes it harder.
Yeah.
And I think that's the temptation, I feel like. Because I
Yeah.
know when I've been there, I'm like, I don't want to be around anybody right now. I just want to crawl into a hole and be alone and try to numb it as much as possible. But I think, John, you had mentioned before, but a lot of the pain that we deal with happens in the context of a relationship.
Hmm.
And healing can only happen in the context of relationship. And so the more we isolate, the more we try to hide. I think that is, honestly, that is the enemy's play, right? That is how he divides and conquers, isolates, and subdues, right? And so as hard as it is, leaning into that isn't just acknowledging it, it's to connect with other people in it too. And so that would be my encouragement. One, just to simply resonate. It's hard. I get it. But to do the unnatural thing, to lean in and to connect, it's the path forward. Yeah.
Thank you, both of you. Before we started this, we prayed for this conversation, knowing that it was a weighty subject. And our desire is to have these conversations that encourage and lift up. And I do believe there are a lot of things that have been shared today that I hope will truly provide that encouragement, that courage to anyone who is navigating pain in their lives, whether it's right now, whether it's from the past or in the future. So thanks, both of you. I wanted to close with a quote from the French philosopher Albert Camus. He wrote, "In the midst of winter, I at last discovered that there was in me an invincible summer." And that makes me happy. For it says that no matter how hard the world pushes against me, within me there's something stronger, something better, pushing right back. And so as we face pain, may each of us find our invincible summer. Thanks for tuning in to The Work Within. We hope this show blessed you in some way. Please subscribe and leave us a review. Your support means a lot to us. Finally, if you're looking for a therapist, we'd love to help. Visit us at www.watershedinitiative.com to get started. For a limited time, new clients can receive 10% off their first 5 sessions of therapy by mentioning The Work Within. Join us again next time.